My name is Norma Pearson. I'm 37 years old. And this is the story of how my mother-in-law called me the help, and how I walked up to the mic, in front of her and everyone else, and revealed that I owned the very resort she thought she ruled. The night it happened, the air smelled like pine and roasted rosemary. We were seated inside the banquet hall of Ridgewood Estate, a luxury resort by Lake Arrowhead that Connor's family had been visiting for over 2 decades. It was a place filled with gold-trimmed curtains, massive fireplaces, and a self-importance that hung in the air like expensive perfume. I'd just walked in with a tray of freshly baked sourdough rolls, not because anyone asked me to, but because dinner was running late and the kitchen staff seemed overwhelmed. I knew how this family worked. They'd complain before lifting a finger. As I passed by the long table filled with his cousins, aunts, and Elaine, my mother-in-law, I heard it. That voice. I swear she forgot the sauce again, Elaine muttered. Just loud enough. Laughter bubbled from across the table like champagne fizz, light and dismissive. No one corrected her. No one looked embarrassed. Instead, they glanced at me, half amusement, half pity, like they weren't sure if I was the caterer or Connor's wife. I stood frozen for a second, bread basket still in my hands. But instead of confronting her, I did what I always did, I swallowed it. You see, to Elaine, I was never Norma the architect, the woman who led multi-million-dollar redevelopment projects across the West Coast. I was just Connor's wife. A woman with vague career aspirations, someone who probably still rented her dresses and didn't know the difference between Napa and Sonoma. And the worst part? Connor never stopped it. If his mother called my clothes quaint, he'd squeeze my hand and say, "She doesn't mean it, babe." When his sister side-eyed my cooking during Thanksgiving, he'd mutter, "Just let it go, she's always like that." That was the thing about Connor, he was kind, gentle even, but he never made space for me. Not really. Every year we came back here, I told myself I wouldn't let them reduce me again. And every year, I ended up being the one cleaning up dishes, directing staff, arranging last-minute seating changes, like I was part of the service team instead of part of the family. I wore my silence like armor, thinking it made me strong. But all it did was make me invisible. Let me tell you something, there's a particular kind of hurt when people look through you, not at you. When you plan an entire surprise party for Connor's father, food, venue, seating, guest list, and someone else gets credit because she brought a bundt cake. When you design an entire outdoor fire pit patio renovation for the family lodge, quietly, without asking, and Elaine says, "How quaint." Looks like someone finally Googled Pinterest. There were so many of those moments. They didn't hit all at once. They chipped away at me over time, like water slowly hollowing out stone. I used to cry in secret. Never in front of them. I'd park in the back of the grocery store lot just to have a place to sob. I'd turn on the shower just to hide the sound. And when I'd finally calm down, I'd always whisper the same words to myself. "You're stronger than this. Build. Don't break." So I did. Quietly, while they mocked me. I started taking extra projects outside my day job. Sustainable housing plans, urban zoning advisory roles, small consultations that turned into serious investment opportunities. I formed my own holding company, Birchlight Holdings, with the help of a silent partner and started acquiring properties. Quietly. Strategically. 3 years into it, I owned more square footage in California and Utah than any other woman in my original architectural class. But the Hartwells didn't know. Connor didn't know. Not because I was hiding it, because they never asked. Until I stumbled across a private listing. The Ridgewood Estate. The Hartwells' summer shrine. The place where I was always too plain, too silent, too invisible. The owners were retiring and wanted someone with a long-term vision. Someone quiet. Someone who could afford to pay in full. They found me. I didn't even blink. I signed. I wired. I took ownership of the Ridgewood estate under Birchlight Holdings, with a controlling stake of 74%. And I didn't tell a soul. Let them make jokes about my Macy's shoes. Let them complain that the lavender-scented lobby was replaced with cedar wood. Let them whine that the resort just doesn't feel like home anymore. I wasn't looking for their approval. I was preparing the stage. Friday night was the welcome gala, the traditional kickoff to their beloved summer reunion. Everyone would be there, Elaine in her pearls, Lauren with her smug little smile, Haley with her fake kindness. That's when I'd make the announcement. But not by standing up and shouting. No, I wanted them to hear my name before they saw me. I asked Ethan, the new general manager, to read the formal welcome and ownership update. He practiced his lines with precision, ending on the sentence I waited years to hear. And now, allow me to introduce the new owner of Ridgewood Estate, Ms. Norma Pearson. The moment he said my name, a hush fell over the hall like a sudden snowfall. Forks paused mid-air. Elaine's face drained of color. Her wine glass slipped, staining the white tablecloth a deep crimson. Connor turned in his seat and looked up at me. I stood on the balcony above, dressed in black, not designer, but powerful in its simplicity. My hand rested on the oak railing. And for the first time in 10 years, I looked them all in the eye, not with submission, but with certainty. This was no longer their stage. It was mine. I descended the staircase slowly, my heels striking against the polished wood with rhythmic finality. Each step echoed, like a countdown to something none of them could stop. My pulse was steady, my breath even. I'd imagined this moment for months, maybe years. But the reality was sweeter than I ever dreamed, not because I wanted to humiliate them, but because I no longer needed to prove myself to any of them. When I reached the floor, I didn't head to the center right away. I stopped by Connor's side. His face, that familiar mix of disbelief and awkward admiration, flickered when I met his eyes. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "You're the new owner of Ridgewood?" I didn't answer with words. I simply turned and walked to the front of the room. Ethan handed me the mic. I didn't flinch. "Good evening," I said, voice calm and clear. "I know many of you have questions. Maybe even a few concerns. That's understandable." There were no jokes. No murmurs of agreement. Only silence and stares. From people who'd once looked right through me, now squinting as if seeing me for the first time. I continued, "Ridgewood Estate is now under the management of Birchlight Holdings, a firm I created over the last few years. As its founder and majority owner, I've been overseeing the renovations, policy updates, and staffing changes you may have noticed this year." I let that hang in the air. Everything, from the stricter check-in process to the allergy-safe fragrances, even the increased staff wages, was deliberate. Because a resort isn't just a place to relax. It's a reflection of how we treat people. And for too long, Ridgewood's values didn't align with mine. I turned slightly, looking toward Elaine's table. "I've heard your feedback about the new feel of the place. And I welcome it. Because moving forward, suggestions can be directed to me, the owner." Gasps fluttered around the room. Not the loud, theatrical kind. The quiet, choking kind. The kind that meant something deep inside them had broken loose. I stepped back, placed the mic on the table, and walked away. I didn't need to linger. I'd said what I came to say. Behind me, I heard the buzz start, whispered exchanges, awkward shuffles of cutlery, a sudden rush of movement from Elaine as she stood up and turned toward the door. But I wasn't interested in their reactions. I was interested in what came next. The next morning, I didn't join them for breakfast. I walked the perimeter of the estate instead, reviewing blueprints with Ethan for the new solar-powered wellness center we were constructing. The team was energized, the staff lighter, more optimistic than they'd been in years. And I saw them, the front desk attendant who once trembled when Elaine raised her voice. The janitor who used to avoid making eye contact. The sous chef who now wore a pin that read, "Proud to be Ridgewood." I'd changed the culture without firing a single soul. Just by replacing fear with fairness. At lunch, I returned to the dining patio. The Hartwells were seated at their usual long table, though this time there were no loud conversations, no giddy laughter. Just sips of water and side eyes. Connor stood when he saw me. He opened his mouth to speak, but I lifted a hand slightly, not to silence him, but to say, not here. Elena, though, couldn't help herself. She stood abruptly and said, Norma, this joke has gone on long enough. You've made your point. But family matters shouldn't be handled with microphones and public announcements. Her voice was clipped, sharp, but beneath the performance, I saw the tremble. She was trying to reclaim control. To pull the veil back over a reality she no longer owned. I turned to her. You're right, I said softly. This isn't a joke. And it's not just about family. It's about boundaries. You embarrassed me, she said through clenched teeth. I raised an eyebrow. Did I? Or did you just finally hear me? She looked around, as if expecting anyone, to leap to her defense. But the table remained still. Even Connor kept his eyes lowered. And for the first time, Elaine had no words. I leaned forward just a little. From now on, you're a guest here. Like everyone else. You'll be treated with respect, but only if you give it. Then I turned and walked away. Not triumphant, not angry, just at peace. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need Connor's excuses. I didn't need to shrink myself to fit into their picture of what a wife, a daughter-in-law, a woman should be. That night, during the cocktail reception for returning guests, I gave a brief presentation outlining the resort's development plans. I stood on the newly installed stage in the ballroom, no more elevated VIP booths for the Hartwells. Just one level. One space. One community. I spoke about the Cecilia Foundation, named after my mother, and how it would sponsor training and education for women in hospitality. I shared plans for an on-site learning center and housing stipends for employees. The room clapped. Not just politely, genuinely. And as I looked into their faces, I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just revenge. This was healing. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because what came next, the slow unraveling of everything they had taken for granted, was just beginning. The next few days at Ridgewood felt like watching a tide change, slow, certain, and unstoppable. The old rhythms were breaking down, replaced by something steadier, more just. The staff no longer flinched at the sound of familiar names. Guests checked in without skipping the process. Elaine and her circle? They moved through the resort like ghosts, clearly unsure of where they now stood. I didn't need to confront them again. The new structure did it for me. But then came the email. Subject, Hi. Can we talk privately? It was from Lauren, Connor's cousin. The one who once smirked when I said I shopped at local co-ops instead of Whole Foods. The one who'd accidentally left me off the dinner invite list the second summer I joined the Hartwells at Ridgewood. Her message was short, polished, and drenched in fake gratitude. She said she appreciated what I'd done for the resort, and hoped to discuss a small matter regarding the cabin her family has used for years. What she really meant, please don't take it away from us. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded her message to Birchlight's legal team, attaching her leasing history and payment records. The internal system I'd implemented flagged her unit months ago for unauthorized subleasing. Every peak season, she'd been renting it out on luxury travel sites under a pseudonym and pocketing the profit. No taxes paid. No consent given. The evidence was all there. Over $41,000 in quiet transactions. Hidden in an account under her husband's name. We didn't threaten. We didn't negotiate. We simply sent the full report to the California Franchise Tax Board. Lauren found out 3 days later, when she received a formal audit notice in the mail. She messaged me again, this time without the faux politeness. You really did this to me. I didn't reply. Because she wasn't asking a question. She was mourning the loss of the privilege she'd abused for years. Connor's uncle, Will, didn't get off any easier. He'd kept Cabin 6 as his personal sanctuary, even after his lease expired last year. He'd used backdoor agreements and private favors to keep the place off the booking system. He thought nobody would notice. I did. We issued a formal notice, 30 days to vacate the property. No renewal. No appeal. That cabin now belongs to a non-profit that provides all expense-paid vacations for military veteran families. On July 4th, they moved in, and I personally wrote the welcome letter. The old Hartwell hierarchy had depended on silence and handshakes. Now, the only thing that mattered was a contract and a code of ethics. But it wasn't just about property. It was about power, the quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need shouting or performance. The kind that changes everything simply by refusing to play by the same rules. And yet, Elaine wasn't done. She arrived at my office on a Thursday afternoon without notice, like she had every right to barge in, like nothing had changed. She wore a tweed blazer, a string of pearls, and the kind of expression that women in power think is calm, but only reads as brittle. Her heels clicked across the floor like a challenge. "We need to talk," she said. I didn't stand. I gestured toward the seat across from me. "Norma," she began, "this has gone too far. We're family. You've made your point. You've succeeded. Congratulations. But now it's time to come back to the table. There's no need to air all this out publicly." I said nothing. "You've worked hard, and we all see that," she continued, her tone sugar-coated with threat. "But if people start digging, if the press or local papers get wind of all these changes, it won't look good. Not for you. Not for Ridgewood." That was her tactic now? Fear? I opened a drawer and placed a folder on the desk between us. Her name was printed on the front in bold, clean letters. Inside were notarized documents, transcripts of front desk calls where she berated staff. A resignation letter from a housekeeper who said Elaine called her trash in uniform. A complaint filed by a summer intern instructed to avoid all contact with her unless absolutely necessary. We had kept it all quiet, not out of mercy, but out of strategy. Elaine stared at the folder for several seconds. Then slowly picked it up, as if it might bite her. "I handled these matters quietly," I said. "Out of respect. But if you try to spin this in any way, I will release every record." Her face tightened. Her hand clenched the folder like it was her last lifeline. "You'll regret going against me," she hissed. I didn't flinch. "Maybe. But I'll never regret choosing myself." She stood, dabbing her hands with a tissue like she'd touched something dirty, and left without another word. And just like that, I knew, I'd taken back more than property or control. I'd reclaimed my voice. 2 weeks later, Connor showed up. No call. No warning. Just a soft knock on the door and a paper coffee cup in his hand, unsweetened, just the way I liked it back when we still shared morning routines. "Is this a bad time?" he asked. I looked up at him, tired eyes, hunched shoulders, the weight of years we spent side by side, and yet never really seeing each other. I nodded for him to come in. We sat across from each other. No laptops. No papers. No performance. Just silence, and the sound of something quiet breaking between us. "I thought I knew you," he said. "I thought I understood. But now I see, maybe I only saw the version of you I wanted to." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. He looked down at the cup. "I see your strength now. But I also see the loneliness. And I don't know if there's still room for me in your life." I exhaled slowly. "You're not a bad man, Connor. You just always took the quiet road. But I had to take the one where I had a voice." He stayed a moment longer, then left the coffee on the desk and walked out. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't need to. Some endings don't come with closure. Just understanding. In the weeks that followed, I didn't hear from Connor again. Not in a message. Not in a letter. Not even through the usual back-channel routes families use to gossip and guilt trip. And I was fine with that. It was a strange kind of peace, one that didn't come from resolution, but from no longer needing one. The old ache of wanting to belong, of wishing someone would defend me at that table, had dissolved. What remained was clarity. My story didn't need their understanding. It needed truth. And I had finally spoken mine. I moved the Ridgewood Estates central office to the west side of the lake, into a small cabin most guests had ignored for years. No stunning view. No marble fireplaces. Just wide windows, pine trees, and silence. It was perfect. We renovated it with a purpose: solar panels on the roof, reclaimed wood interiors, a new workstation with a view of the lake. It was quiet, but not empty. The team I built, young women, mostly, many of whom had been dismissed or passed over in previous jobs, filled the space with energy and ideas. We didn't just run a resort. We reimagined what it meant to lead. And the Hartwells? They watched it all unfold, no longer from thrones, but from standard guest rooms booked like everyone else. The nameplates they once demanded for their tables were gone. The subtle head nods from management vanished. Their whispers were now met with equal, unflinching stares. Some tried to adjust. Some tried to reclaim influence. And some, like Lauren, just unraveled. After the tax audit began, she emailed again. This time, begging. She blamed her husband. She claimed it was a misunderstanding. She offered to make a donation to the foundation in exchange for a quiet resolution. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to our legal team with the subject line, "For records only." No response necessary. And then came the letter from the California Department of Revenue. By then, Lauren was already on her third frantic email. I read it once, calmly. And then deleted it. I didn't need revenge to be loud. I just needed it to be honest. Connor's uncle Will tried something similar. He called me one afternoon with a voice wrapped in false warmth, asking if we could chat about tradition and how his family had been visiting Ridgewood since long before the paperwork changed hands. I told him tradition doesn't equal entitlement. He tried to pivot, offering to help fund the new wellness wing if I reinstated their family's lease agreement on Cabin 6. I declined. That cabin now hosted military families, some of whom had never been able to take a real vacation before. On the 4th of July, I personally delivered S. Moray's kits and beach towels to the kids splashing in the shallows. I stayed until sundown, listening to one veteran tell me that this was the first time in years he saw his wife smile without pain in her eyes. That was more than any Hartwell ever gave me. Then, on a cool Tuesday afternoon, the inevitable happened. Elaine returned. But this time, not with threats. She walked into the Ridgewood lobby wearing a soft gray cardigan, her pearl necklace traded for a scarf, and her usual cold expression softened at the edges. She waited near the reception desk until someone pointed toward my office. I didn't deny her entrance. "Norma," she said, stepping inside. "I know I have no right to be here." That stopped me. She stood by the chair, unsure whether to sit. But I came anyway. Because I don't know how else to say this, other than the truth. I remained silent. Listening. She cleared her throat, but her voice trembled. "I underestimated you. For years. I dismissed you because you didn't come from money. Because you didn't speak loudly. Because you didn't act the way I expected." I tilted my head slightly. "You didn't see me." "I didn't try to," she admitted, her voice breaking. "And I taught my family to do the same." The moment stretched between us. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," she added quickly. "I know that might be too much. but I am here to say, I'm sorry. Not because of what you've built, but because of what I failed to recognize long before that. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't perfect. But for the first time in 10 years, it was real. I nodded. I appreciate you saying that. She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for a decade. I don't expect a seat at your table anymore. But I wanted to come say it while I still could. And then, just like that, she turned and walked out. No drama. No denial. Just honesty. It didn't undo what had been done. But it opened a door I never thought she'd even knock on. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, staring out at the lake. The water was still. The trees moved in slow waves with the wind. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of proving anything. The next evening, we held the Ridgewood Employee Appreciation Dinner. No guests. No owners. Just the people who kept the place running, finally celebrated in the hall they once only set up for others. I gave a short speech. Not about me. About them. And then we danced. No pearls. No pretenses. Just laughter and the soft glimmer of string lights overhead. I knew I'd never go back to the version of myself who once cried in a laundry room or smiled through cruel jokes at dinner tables. That Norma was gone. She wasn't weak, she was just waiting. And now that she'd arrived, she wasn't going anywhere. The following week, Ridgewood's transformation reached a point where even those clinging to the old ways had no choice but to acknowledge the shift. Elaine didn't return after that afternoon in my office. Lauren's name disappeared from the guest list. Will sent one final message asking to put everything behind us. I didn't even open it. We weren't putting anything behind us. We were moving forward without them. The resort had never looked more alive. Not flashy. Not overrun with influencers or wealthy elites. Just alive. Children from veteran families playing tag under pine trees. Local artisans showcasing their work in the main lodge. Environmental teams testing lake water quality in preparation for the new eco-spa. It felt like the kind of place my mother, Cecilia, would have been proud of. She was the one who taught me that dignity wasn't handed to you, it was something you chose to wear, even when no one saw its value. She worked as a housekeeper her entire life. Woke up before the sun. Came home long after it set. Never once complained. I remembered how, when I was 11, I asked her why she never fought back when guests at the hotel snapped their fingers or called her girl. She looked at me, wiped her hands on her apron, and said, "Because I'm not here to be seen. I'm here to build something you can stand on." At the time, I didn't fully understand. But now I did. That's why I created the Cecilia Foundation, not just to honor her, but to create opportunity for women like her. Women who cleaned rooms, answered phones, folded napkins, and endured more condescension than most people could stomach. And Ridgewood? That was just the beginning. One morning, I received a letter from a young woman named Grace. She had been part of our seasonal housekeeping staff and used her bonus to apply for a community college program in hotel management. She wrote, "You don't know what it means to be treated like a person instead of a tool. But maybe you do. That's why you changed everything. Thank you." I read it 3 times. Then placed it in the same drawer where I kept my mother's last paycheck stub, laminated, preserved. A reminder of where I came from. Later that afternoon, as I walked across the grounds to meet with contractors about the wellness center's next phase, I saw Connor. He wasn't staying at the resort. He was just standing near the entrance, coffee in hand, staring out toward the lake like he was waiting for a version of us that no longer existed. Our eyes met. For a second, it was like the early days, before all the family politics, before the suffocating silences. Just 2 people who used to talk about books and road trips and where we'd build a home one day. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied, keeping my voice even. I heard about the scholarship fund, he said, stepping closer. And the veterans cabin. And the sustainability partnership. I nodded. It's only the start. He looked down. I didn't know how much I'd failed to see. How much you were carrying, quietly. I shrugged. Most people didn't. I never meant to make you feel small. You didn't make me feel anything, Connor. You just never stood up when it counted. That hung in the air. He nodded slowly. I get that now. We stood in silence for a few seconds, the wind playing through the trees. Then he said the thing I think we both knew was coming. Is there still room for us to figure things out? I looked at him, really looked. He was still the same man in some ways. Still kind. Still thoughtful. Still rooted in the idea that good intentions could fix anything. But I was no longer the woman who accepted crumbs and called them support. I don't hate you, I said. But I outgrew the space you made for me. And I'm not going to shrink again just to fit back in. He exhaled, long and low. Then smiled, a sad, understanding sort of smile. Then I guess this is goodbye. I nodded. Yeah. It is. He left. And this time, I didn't cry. That night, as the sun dipped below the lake, I took a walk down to the little wooden pier at the edge of the property. It used to be the Hartwells' prized sunset spot, the one they claimed like it had their name carved into it. Now, it belonged to everyone. I sat on the bench at the end, pulled my sweater tight, and let the silence wrap around me. Not the silence of being dismissed, the silence of peace. Of having finally, fully stepped into the life I built with my own 2 hands. Somewhere in the distance, kids were laughing near the fire pit. Music drifted from the open windows of the lodge. The Ridgewood estate wasn't just a resort anymore. It was a rebirth. And as the stars blinked into view, I thought of every woman who had ever been silenced, sidelined, underestimated. This one's for you. A week later, I stood inside the old greenhouse on Ridgewood's east side, now repurposed into a community learning hub. Sunlight poured through the glass ceiling, reflecting off the newly painted walls and rows of fresh seedlings. It was quiet, fragrant with basil and mint, and full of promise. We'd just hosted the first workshop for young local women interested in hospitality careers. Some came from small towns, others from underfunded schools, and many had never set foot in a resort until that day. I watched them touch the soft leather of reception binders, trace their fingers along the granite counters, and ask questions with wide, hopeful eyes. I thought about the first time I'd walked into Ridgewood. How I'd stood on the same marbled floor, unseen, unheard, like furniture with a heartbeat. And now here I was, not just seen, but witnessed. Not just leading, but inviting others in. That was the real revenge. Not the silence I enforced or the power I reclaimed, but the door I opened behind me. But not everyone appreciated the new Ridgewood. The whispers started first. From longtime members who once strolled in without check-ins. From Elaine's golf club friends who missed their private suite discounts. From Lauren's social circle, still reeling from the audit fallout. They said the place had lost its charm. That it felt too corporate now. What they meant was, they couldn't manipulate it anymore. They missed the chaos that catered to them. The favoritism. The unspoken rules where power moved in handshakes and eye rolls and behind-the-scenes calls. One afternoon, I overheard a woman near the gift shop say, "I miss the days when we had people who knew how to treat guests properly." The irony burned. She said it right after a Ridgewood intern, a shy 19-year-old named Talia, helped her with 3 oversized bags and offered to carry them to her cabin. The next day, I called Talia into my office. She looked nervous. I could tell from the way she sat stiffly, hands folded tight in her lap. "You've been doing great," I said. "I heard about the help you gave Mrs. Malden." Her cheeks flushed pink. She, wasn't too happy. Said I was walking too slow. I smiled gently. You were doing it right. Don't let her rewrite your value. She blinked and her shoulders relaxed. Then I handed her a sealed envelope. This is a full scholarship to the State Hospitality Conference next month. All expenses covered. She gasped. But I'm just an intern. No, I said. You're the future of this place. That moment, that spark, was worth more than every wine-soaked gala the Hartwells ever threw. But the resentment didn't stay quiet forever. A journalist from a lifestyle blog reached out with an interview request, said they'd heard mixed reviews about the new tone at Ridgewood. That I had removed traditional families from their generational spaces. That some guests felt alienated. I agreed to speak. But only if the interview took place at the Lake Pier, during sunset, with no makeup team, no PR coaching, and no rehearsed questions. I wore jeans. Brought my mother's locket. And told the truth. I spoke about the invisible labor that women carry, especially women who clean linens, prep food, refill ice, and are never invited to the celebrations they make possible. I explained how the old system had been full of invisible walls I'd decided to tear down one by one, not out of vengeance, but necessity. And when she asked if I felt I had changed Ridgewood too much, I said, I didn't change Ridgewood. I revealed what was already broken, and I chose to rebuild it without apology. The interview went viral in less than 2 days. Women from across the country shared it. Former Ridgewood guests wrote in. A housekeeping staff member from a rival resort sent a handwritten note, "You're doing what the rest of us dream about." Even Ethan, our general manager, came to my office and said, "You've made this place real. It used to be beautiful. But now, it's true." Still, the old guard made one last move. Elaine sent a formal letter. Handwritten. On her monogrammed stationery. In it, she expressed her hope that Ridgewood will find a way to honor its traditions, and asked if the Hartwell family might be reinstated as special legacy members, in the spirit of peace. I read the letter once. Then fed it through the shredder. There was no anger. Just finality. Legacy isn't about how long you've been somewhere. It's about what you leave behind. The Hartwells left entitlement. I would leave opportunity. That weekend, I hosted Ridgewood's first all-staff appreciation dinner, under the stars, with handmade decorations and dishes from every cultural background represented on our team. We sat on long benches, passed plates like family, and played music until midnight. I looked around the table. At Talia. At Ethan. At a dozen women and men who had once been seen as replaceable. And I saw something the Hartwells never truly understood. This was home. Not because it was inherited. But because we'd built it, together. The morning after the staff dinner, the lake was covered in a soft fog, like the world had exhaled and wrapped Ridgewood in a blanket of stillness. I stood on the porch of the west side cabin that now served as my office, a mug of mint tea warming my hands, watching the mist drift over the water like ghosts finally moving on. I had made peace with the past. Not because it had been resolved or forgiven, but because I no longer needed anything from it. That's what no one tells you about reclaiming your life. The power doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from quiet sovereignty. The moment you no longer wait for someone to apologize, validate, or even notice you. The moment you stop knocking on a door that was never meant to open for you, and build your own. I sat down at my desk that day and began sketching Ridgewood's next chapter. Not in blueprints, though those would come, but in intention. A partnership with a tribal environmental group to restore native plant habitats around the lake. A new wellness retreat centered on accessibility, with programs for single mothers and survivors of domestic violence. An internship pipeline for young women of color studying architecture and design. The Hartwells would never have imagined any of this. Because they were too busy protecting their position to think about their purpose. They believed power was inherited. That leadership came from last names and elbow rubs at golf tournaments. But I knew the truth. Power, real power, is built when no one is looking. That's what I did. In parking lots. In libraries. In quiet tears and buried dreams. In invoices paid under LLCs they never cared to ask about. In hours upon hours of invisible work. And when the time came, I didn't throw it in their faces. I simply made it impossible to ignore. A few weeks later, I received a letter. This time not from Elaine or Lauren or any of the people who once held court at Ridgewood. It was from a woman named Marta. She worked housekeeping at a high-end resort up north. One of her co-workers had shared the article about Ridgewood, and she'd read it 3 times. She wrote, "I've cleaned thousands of rooms in 15 years. No one's ever asked me what I wanted to build. I didn't even know I was allowed to dream that big. But after reading about you, I want to try." I cried reading that. Not because of guilt or sadness, but because I knew I wasn't alone anymore. That was the legacy. Not the mic drop at the dinner. Not the eviction notices to the Hartwells. Not even the moment Connor looked at me and finally saw what had been there all along. The legacy was this: giving someone else permission to be whole. To live big. Loud. Unapologetically. The next time Elaine visited Ridgewood, she didn't walk into my office. She came as a guest. Paid the standard rate. Followed check-in protocol. Stayed 2 days, mostly silent. We passed each other in the hallway. She nodded once, not with arrogance, but with something that almost looked like respect. I nodded back. We didn't need words. We both knew what that moment meant. She would never own me again. As for Connor, he mailed me a hardcover copy of a book we once read together in college, A History of Women in American Architecture. Inside was a sticky note. "I see you now. Thank you for building what I couldn't." That was the last time I heard from him. And that, too, was enough. Now, most mornings start the same. A walk by the lake. A warm cup of tea. Staff members stopping by with updates and laughter. Guests asking if I work the front desk. Sometimes, I say yes just to keep them guessing. Because I no longer need recognition to know who I am. I'm Norma Pearson. A woman who was once mistaken for the help at a dinner table she helped set. And now? I own the table. The room. The resort. Not to prove a point. But to build a place where no one else has to shrink to be accepted. To anyone who's ever been silenced, sidelined, or underestimated, I hope my story reminds you, you don't need permission to rise. You just need to start. Brick by brick. Voice by voice. And when the moment comes, when they finally see what you've built, let your power speak softly. Because silence? When chosen, not forced? Is the loudest answer of all. Norma's journey is more than a story about revenge, it's about transformation. She didn't shout. She didn't fight dirty. She simply built something so strong it couldn't be ignored. If you've ever felt invisible in a room you deserve to lead, her story is for you. Have you ever been underestimated or sidelined? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes, where real power is revealed, one truth at a time.